The glowing man and Nate the nuclear knight begin the unenviable task of catching and killing a raider in exchange for important information. We're going to talk about it right here in our review of Geiger #2 from Image Comics. See you in 3. Welcome back to Comical Opinions. This is our review of Geiger #2 from Image Comics. This issue is written by Jeff Johns with art by Gary Frank, colors by Brad Anderson, letters by Rob Lay, with the main cover A, drawn by Gary Frank and Brad Anderson. Before we dig into this issue, let's recap what happened in issue #1. We're introduced to the glowing man as he wanders from town to town looking for some peace and a good book to read. When trouble comes, he handles it with extreme prejudice, which tends to make the townspeople very nervous and afraid of him because he's adopted a sort of urban legend about him as a monster or some kind of crazed killer. As time passes, he eventually crosses paths with a nuclear knight from the Camelot town in Las Vegas. The nuclear knights have a reputation of being brutal thugs and enforcers, but Nate is definitely not that. And he has dreams of becoming a wandering hero, very similar to what Geiger has achieved in his Legendary. Before the glowing man can say, "Get out of here, I don't want you tagging along, I don't want you following me," Nate tells him that he's heard of another person who was a glowing man like Geiger, and that person has found a cure. That brings us to Geiger #2. We catch up with Geiger and Nate as they're wandering from town to town looking for the information regarding this supposed man who is glowing man like Geiger but had found a cure. And as they're walking along, Nate encounters a wild boar, which is fresh meat, which is exactly what they need when they're wandering the wastelands. He chases after it with a sword, trying to hack it and catch it. The boar races into a cubby hole or a little den that's carved out of the side of a small hill. And when they catch up to it, he sort of stops and pauses because the boar has a family. He has a mate and children. And Geiger says, "Kill them all. We need the meat. It's good for us. We need that to survive." And Nate sort of gives him the puppy dog eyes and says, "Don't kill them all." And they wind up feasting on boar that night. But in an act of mercy, Geiger decides to kill only the papa boar and leave the mother and the babies alone. The next day, they arrive at the town of Silverton and they head into the sheriff's office and they say, "We heard that maybe a man who is like me, a glowing man, had come through here and he's been cured, and we want to know if you know where he's gone and if you've seen him." The sheriff says, "Well, yes, I happen to do know who he was and that he stayed here briefly and that I can give you information about that person. However, I have a problem and I think you can solve it." And the sheriff explains that there's a bandit that's been raiding the town every few days, setting off explosives, starting fires as a distraction to get people running around. And while that's happening, he raids the town stores for medical supplies and food and says, "If you catch the bandit and you kill him, I'll tell you the name of the person who was a glowing man who found a cure." The glowing man wants nothing to do with it. He doesn't want to be a hired gun. That's not his deal. But now he knows he really has no choice. He has to find and kill the bandit to get what he wants. Geiger and Nate spend a few days staking out the town. They're waiting for something to happen, but it's a long, slow, sort of boring work. But eventually, yes, the bandit shows up. He sets off a bunch of explosives, and that leads to a chase on motorcycles that eventually leads to a chase running on top of a moving train that eventually leads to a chase where the bandit has stored all this stuff. And surprise upon the surprise, there is something a little bit more interesting or a little bit more understandable about where the bandit has been spending his time and why he's been raiding the town of Silverton. Geiger learns that the bandit is, as you might expect, just a man with a mask who's been raiding the town to get supplies for his wife and his children. So even though the bandit wasn't doing a good thing, he was doing it to do what he had to do to survive, to feed his family, to take care of his family. And so the story draws parallels between the beginning of the story with the boar and now the end of the story with the bandit. And that Geiger now has a choice. He can either kill the bandit and get his information from the sheriff, or he can choose not to kill just for the sake of getting what he wants. And that leaves him with a choice. And what does he choose? He chooses to let the guy go, but he takes the mask, smashes it up, covers it with some blood to give it the appearance of death. And so the sheriff eventually does give him what he wants, but secretly he let the bandit go. However, the bandit has now taken this opportunity to basically to say that Geiger's act of mercy was a second lease on life, an opportunity to lead a moral and healthy life. but his luck runs out in a different reason when another searcher comes walking by. Switching gears to talk about the character work, the parallel is the biggest part of this issue between the boar and the bandit. That'll come later in the section when we talk about themes and structure, but it's Nate that really makes the difference in this issue. Nate is kind of a sidekick, but he's kind of a buffoon. He's soft-hearted. He's a bit clumsy. He doesn't quite do all the things that make him what anyone would consider a badass, but his merciful, sort of soft-hearted demeanor has a balancing or a counterpoint balance to Geiger's rough, gruff, almost ruthless demeanor. So even though from Geiger's point of view, Nate is a pain in the butt, it's Nate's presence that sort of gives a little bit of a softening, smoothing edge to Geiger's gruffness. And so now some character work is developing in through their relationship that maybe Geiger didn't wanted, but maybe it's what Geiger needed. And that leads us to the art presentation from Gary Frank and Brad Anderson. This artwork is exquisite. I mean, Frank's pencils and inks are detailed, they're creative, they're so vibrant and so alive. He really knows how to get into the guts of a character, and I mean that metaphorically speaking. The characters just look fantastic. And then special kudos and hats off to Brad Anderson for this issue is sort of overcome with all kinds of earth tones because it's a dusty, sort of wooden and dirty western town. There's so many browns and so many earth tones, but yet it still pops and it looks vibrant and alive, which complements Gary Frank's pencils and inks. And then when Geiger goes into his full glowing man mode, the glow sort of covers all the surroundings like a glow stick, which is exactly what you'd expect. But the way it's presented in the expert detailed way, and that's the key word here, detailed way that it comes across on the page, it looks amazing. Let's talk about the pacing and structure a little bit. In total, the story isn't very big. This is not a huge story. It's actually it feels small and almost intimate, but every scene counts. So Jeff Johns gives you each scene that's constructed well, that to make a point or to make a statement or cause something to happen that makes Geiger think or changes his attitude about a certain situation. So even though from a arc perspective, this story doesn't move Geiger forward very much, other than by the end, yes, he does get the name he's looking for. Every scene is designed to support Geiger's journey and to maybe adjust his character a little bit, adjust his attitude a little bit, and support him in what he's trying to do. And each scene is paced incredibly well. So there is no waste in this comic. Everything matters. Every panel matters. Every bit of dialogue matters. So a story should leave the protagonist in a different place, either as an individual or in the world and in their journey from where it started. And this does it effortlessly. Regarding the themes and what's the overarching message you get out of this story, if you want to call it that, it's about this concept of mercy in the face of survival. When you have to make the hard choice because it's what's right for you, but it's done at the expense of somebody else. And so again, you have those parallels between the boar in the beginning of the story and the bandit at the end of the story. They follow that similar track, and basically Geiger's forced to make a similar choice. And in both cases, he chooses a form or at least a range of mercy that gives Geiger a better or a stronger sense of heroism, at least from the reader's point of view, and also gives him a little bit of a more even-handed edge. Final thoughts. What do we think about Geiger number 2 from Image Comics? It's another step forward in Geiger's path to finding a cure, but it also works as a morality tale about the notion of making a hard choice or doing a callous thing in the face of survival, and when that choice is presented, making the merciful choice. The plot, again, doesn't move forward very much, but every scene matters. Every scene is incredibly well constructed and well paced, and the art team is just outstanding. So all things considered, we're going to give Geiger number 2 from Image Comics an 8.8 out of 10. I want to know what you think about Geiger, at least this latest version or volume of Geiger, which is different than the one that was released in 2021. Are you following the series? Are you following all the titles from Ghost Machine? Let us know in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, and comment, subscribe, and make sure to stay tuned through the outro for another review just like this one.